Welcome back to part 2 of my Ukraine War Update Extra. I had too much extra information to impart today, and so therefore I've turned this into 2 videos so it's more easily consumable, and you can come back to this second part after the first one at your own leisure. Let's just get stuck straight into where I cut it off before. Let's have a look at a Mick Ryan long thread, and this is to do with the unmanned surface vehicles being used at Sevastopol. For details, more details are emerging about the Ukrainian attack on Russia. So this was from yesterday, bear in mind. So this is a day out of date, but it's the points he makes that are interesting. Lots more clarity to come in the following days, but a few immediate observations are possible. First, it's clear that Ukraine's ability to target Russian forces continues to expand beyond the battlefield. Operational and strategic targets are now in their sights, underpinned by good intelligence and long-range strike tools like HIMARS and maritime drones. This will place even more stress on a Russian military that is struggling to hold its ground in the areas of Ukraine they have occupied. Mobilized troops will be little help in preventing the kinds of attacks that just occurred in Sevastopol. So this is a good point, of course, that you can bring in all the mobilized troops you like, but it's not going to help, unmanned surface vehicles blow up or cause damage to a bunch of major naval vessels. Second, Ukraine continues to focus on military targets in these operational and strategic strikes. With these Sevastopol strikes, Ukraine is degrading the capacity of the Russians to launch sea-based missiles at Ukraine. And I've been talking about this a lot recently. Everything Ukraine does and the West does is upgrading Ukraine and degrading Russia. And everything Russia does is not about upgrading anything other than arguably the capacity, but the capacity is a capacity of very poor, low morale, poorly trained troops. Okay, so you're just putting boots on the ground with mobilized troops, but everything else is being degraded. You've got HIMARS strikes on 5. I talked about those, the cost of the 5 self-propelled guns that were taken out, which is about $12.5 million worth of kit, and we'll see that in a second. That's gone. What do they replace it with? Well, something that's less good than that, because they just don't have the ability to replace the stuff that's spent with better stuff. Whereas with the West backing Ukraine, when their Soviet era stuff gets spent, they're replacing it with better NATO stuff. And then when that gets spent, even better, we're just constantly upgrading. What Michael Clark talks about, these thresholds being constantly overcome. So we're like, defensive weapons, okay, offensive weapons, okay, and then eventually we're like, well, are we going to do ATAC, and so are we going to give them planes and that kind of stuff. So yeah, absolutely fascinating. Ukraine is also sending the message to Russia, as well as Ukraine supporters in the West, that Ukraine is fighting against a Russian military and not the Russian people. This is an important strategic messaging. Absolutely. Third, the Ukrainian cost-benefit analysis for this attack would have considered whether Russia would stop grain exports as a result. But once again, the strategic messaging of Russia doing so is all bad for Russia. They don't look good coming out of this, Russia, when they're we're going to stop grain, which will starve parts of Africa. Yeah, brilliant. That makes you look really nice. Fourth, this attack again shows how adaptive the Ukrainians are. They have rapidly developed a new maritime strike capability, adding to their growing long-range strike arsenal. Now, these USVs, I need to look into this. I remember right at the beginning of the war, when we were clocking up who was giving what to Ukraine. The UK were giving a bunch of USVs, but no details were released about them. It's just like this thing that slipped by, and everyone's like, "Oh, interesting!" Like, drones for the sea. I don't know whether these are UK drones. These are UK USVs. It wouldn't surprise me. We've got, I say this living very close to one of our major naval ports. My dad was in the Navy, blah blah blah, whatever. But we've got quite a history of even though it's undermanned and our armed forces have had cutbacks after cutbacks. Our navy is pretty useful, and we've also got some pretty useful naval tech, and this could be an example of that. I don't know for sure, but joining the dots. So this is why Russia keeps accusing the UK of stuff, and I don't know whether they accused us of this, but it wouldn't surprise me if the UK were behind these USVs, but maybe not. Who knows? Importantly, Ukraine has integrated this new weapon into their operational and strategic strike concepts. Having a new weapon is good. Being able to cleverly integrate it into military warfighting concepts is the acme of military effectiveness. Fifth, Ukraine is serious about taking back its territory in Crimea. President Zelensky has spoken about this several times in the past. These strikes are slowly corroding Russian military capacity in Crimea and force Russia to look at its force deployment priorities. Here is a speech he gave on this topic recently, so he gives a speech to back that up. Sixth, once again, the Russians are showing that they are not taking their adversary seriously. The Ukrainians have previously attacked Sevastopol with a drone, as well as other targets in Crimea, and the Russians knew Ukraine has been developing this capability. It has been in the open press. Where did the Russians think they were going to use it? Therefore, the Russian inability to adapt quickly to such overt and obvious threats is yet another indication of their sloppy professionalism and inability to conceive that they are fighting a Ukrainian military that is a world-class military institution. It's a really good point. Like, there was that one USV, the type that was used against the ships the other day, that was found sort of washed up near Crimea, sort of a month or so ago. Like, if you'd had that, you would have been right. Okay, they're trying out some stuff. We need to put things in place seriously to stop this from happening. But then you see the footage from these USVs the other day, and they're just like driving around a port willy nilly, just unopposed. Okay, one of them was attacked by a helicopter and artillery from one of the ships, but still, it's just like they hadn't prepared. This is exactly as Ryan says, sloppy professionalism. Seventh and finally, both sides are increasingly resorting to remotely operated or autonomous systems in their operational and strategic strikes. While both sides have used UAVs for recon, surveillance, and tactical strike throughout the war, the Russian use of Iranian drones and Ukraine's use of maritime drones in Sevastopol is a broadening of their use. These systems, while cheaper to procure than crude systems or more sophisticated missiles, still require good intelligence or full targeting and post-strike assessment. However, this element of long-range strike is not cheap and takes a lot of effort to develop. Both sides will have to invest even more in counter-drone and counter-autonomy systems, and I read you out his thread on that previously. The object is to reduce the cost and manpower requirement of such systems so they are cheaper than the drones they destroy. As such, the war in Ukraine will be a test bed for these counter-drone systems in all domains and as a cost imposition capability. Anyway, these are just some very initial thoughts of the implications of the strike on Sevastopol. We are sure to learn much more in the coming days. Really interesting. And talking about the cost and the degradation of capabilities, I showed you the picture of, I'm sure it's these same ones, 5 of these SPG self-propelled guns that are 2.5 million a pop to replace, and this appears to be HIMARS taking out the 5, which shows that they are starting to use HIMARS. Not, I talked about this the other day, not on command and control, not on ammunition depots, but on the actual pieces of equipment themselves, which will then cause just further degradation. So here you go. And the precision of these attacks is also super important, and this is what HIMARS do. They're sort of pinpoint accuracy. Take out these 5 bits of kit, and then you look a few days later at the burnt out husks that remain and think, goodness me, that has taken out a lot of, here we go. Here is what the outcome was. And this is a video I showed, or snippets from this, or stills from this, and said, oh, this is going to cost them 12 million to replace or whatever. But the fact that HIMARS were being used for the precision strikes on these is an interesting development, as I said the other day, to show that they are shifting their targeting to the actual hardware. Maybe it's because the supply depots have been pushed further back out of HIMARS range, or maybe they've already destroyed most of the depots that they can get to. And so they are now moving on to the hardware itself, and that would just create more and more problems for the Russians. My last point is on this. So this is I attract obviously any kind of discussions about the war in Ukraine will attract pro-Russian bots and pro-Russian people who are morally. I am pro-Ukraine. I understand that Ukraine isn't perfect, right? It's not a perfect country. No country is. Goodness, like America's far from perfect. UK. I talk about our politics all the time in different areas in this. Um, Far from perfect, but compared to Russia, there's a pretty big difference. And here's a guy here that says um, on my thread, 44 down out of 50. So these are the missiles I was talking about. What air defense? Russia needs to carpet Ukraine and get it over with. So, we know that this person is just a moral monster because he's advocating carpet bombing the entirety of Ukraine and killing, 44 million civilians. Yeah, well done. It can be done in 24 hours, but Putin refuses to do so. And why he refuses to do so is because of the civilians, according to this guy. So later on, he says Ukraine is the most corrupt nation in Europe, not Russia. Putin refuses. Oh, there's my stupid fingers. Putin refuses to carpet Ukraine because of the civilians. Yeah, whatever. The US doesn't care about civilians. Again, whatever. But it does about Ukraine. So remember to the last Ukrainian that this is what the US said. Eventually, the West will collapse and Ukraine will surrender after Odessa falls. Okay, this is just like utter wishful thinking, just complete la la land. He's just absolutely dreaming here. But what I find interesting is Ukraine is the most corrupt nation in Europe, not Russia. It's like, have you ever just used Google? Like, we all live in a world of Google here, and if you're aiming that at me, you're not aiming that particular comment directly at me, but like you've got to know what I'm going to do. Like I've been used to arguing for like the last 15 years in all the books I write, in 4,500, probably more now, 4,700 articles I've written, a huge volume of work I've done where I'm essentially arguing with people that I disagree with, like in philosophy, arguing about this, arguing about that. I'll argue about anything, but not just for the sake of it, because I really believe in truth, right? So if you're going to come along and say Ukraine is the most corrupt nation in Europe, not Russia, you need to justify that claim. So let's just look at the first and most obvious portal call, which is a corruption perceptions index. And this has been going on for some time. And this is an index which ranks countries by their perceived levels of public sector corruption as determined by expert assessments and opinion surveys. Okay. So the CPI generally defines corruption as an abuse of entrusted power for private gain. The index is published annually by a non-governmental organisation, Transparency International, since 1995. Right. So this is going to be about as good, and it talks about the methodology here and whatnot, but it's going to be about as good a metric as you're going to get. Okay, so let's look at the 2021 results. So Denmark, New Zealand, Finland, Singapore, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, Australia. Okay, there you go. So we get down to the UK down here, and then eventually the US around here, and there you go. Now, if we go, so US was around, I think, 27th. It's said here. So if we go down to 122, we get to Ukraine. So Ukraine is not good on the corruption scale. It is a corrupt nation. The thing is, we knew that. We knew that before the war, and we knew that from 2014. And Ukraine has been trying really hard with the assistance, international assistance, to get to deal with its corruption. This guy says that, assuming both of these are in Europe, depending on how you define Europe, he says that Ukraine is the most corrupt nation in Europe, not Russia. But Russia features further down than Ukraine. Well, so Ukraine is 122nd, Russia is down 136 and going down by the looks of it. So I don't. The question is, does this person really believe this, or are they a Russian bot that is saying this on behalf of the Russian nation because they're paid to say this? I can understand the latter more than the former. If it's the former, they are just brainwashed. I suppose I can understand that, but it's just so sad that someone would actually believe this and not be willing to look at some kind of evidence to justify their position. Okay, but even if this isn't the only metric that there is, and there are other things that you can use, it's worth looking elsewhere for some kind of understanding of this whole context. Well, Foreign Policy magazine, which is a very interesting source. This is from 2021. So this is before the war. Why Ukraine's fight against corruption scares Russia, right? The idea is that we know that Ukraine is corrupt and has issues with corruption and has long had issues with corruption, but it's moving in the right direction. And this is the key important point, is that things are being put in place. Yeah, you might argue it's not going quickly enough, or you might, whatever. But I was listening to an interview about this recently with a Ukrainian saying that, that it's young people are the ones that are making a change and are bucking the trend in terms of corruption. They are growing up and not wanting to be part of this, so on and so forth. But this article makes a load of very interesting points, talking about how Ukraine is changing and is putting things in place. But that is one of the things that scares Russia. And there's been this a lot of analysts talking about how part of the reason why Russia has wanted to invade Ukraine is because of the democratization of Ukraine and its cleaning up its act, and to have that as a shining light on its doorstep to the Russian citizens who would then look at Ukraine and say, well, look at that's improving. And what's been interesting is what the median wage has overtaken Russia. So if you're internal to Russia and you're looking out at Ukraine, who is taking on these Western values, wanting to join the EU, wanting to join NATO, median rate wage has gone up, and their corruption is being improved, then what does that say about you and about your country? And then will you then become discontent with your own government because you're moving in an opposite direction to that? So therefore, Putin thinks, well, okay, one of the reasons why I want to take Ukraine back under the fold of Russia is because it will not be this temptation on the doorstep of Ukraine, a kind of threat by temptation, that it is tempting people away or tempting people inside Russia to want to emulate that kind of governance and that kind of existence. So anyway, so much in this article that too much to particularly talk about. So building democracy is not an easy task. Doing so while defending against the aggression of a neighboring country makes the job even harder. As US President Joe Biden has announced a global crusade for democracy with anti-corruption as one of its pillars, Ukraine's experience can teach the world a lesson or two. Despite deceptive and even pernicious feeling that the country is drowning in more corruption than ever before, the fact is that in some areas, such as transparency or monitoring of public officials' lifestyles, Ukraine is now arguably far ahead of Western countries. As it faces huge corruption and challenges related to the rule of law, it has become the testing ground for bold and innovative solutions. Ukraine's corruption-related problems go back to the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, as do many of Russia's, although they had corruption problems before that, but the kind of oligarchy that took over from the communist command economy previously, we've seen that Russia's done the same sort of thing. When the state-planned economy collapsed, state enterprises went bankrupt and were privatized on the principle of first come, first serve amid lawlessness and chaos. This gave birth to oligarchy, which remains a roadblock to Ukraine's progress, so on and so forth. But then, since 2014, Ukrainian civil society groups, governmental reformers, and international partners have been crafting the country's anti-corruption architecture. Experts advocated for the adoption of a host of laws and then monitored their implementation and sustainability. Inspired by the experiences of Romania and Georgia, anti-corruption reforms were based primarily on two pillars. The first one foresaw opening of the public as much state-controlled information, such as registry or information on public procurements or state spending, as possible to shrink the space for corruption. The second was based on establishing independent anti-corruption institutions from scratch to prosecute top officials. And as a result, in 2015-16, the Ukrainian government opened state databases, including real estate, vehicle, land, and company registries. Public procurement was transferred to the online system, ProZorro, which means transparent in English, which now saves up to 10% of the funds budgeted for each purchase due to the site's auction approach, transparency, and competitiveness. Since 2016, around 1 million public servants have submitted asset declarations to the electronic declaration system annually. They must report their and their family members' incomes, assets, real estate, valuable property, corporate rights, beneficial ownership of companies, bank accounts, art, fur coats, and even hard cash stocked in closets or deposit boxes. If there's a gross discrepancy between their lifestyles and income, they will face administrative or criminal sanctions. So on and so forth, so on and so forth, yada, yada, yada. The point is that Ukraine has been putting things in place and moving in the right directions. And Ukraine's anti-corruption efforts, it says here, offer a set of important lessons to transitional democracies seeking to overcome similar challenges. Democracies such as Moldova or other countries across the world where the window of opportunity might open suddenly after the power shift. Just very interesting. And the fact, as I said earlier, that Russia looks at that and doesn't like the look of it. This is exactly what Russian President Vladimir Putin's autocratic regime fears. Having tried to undermine Ukraine through military and hybrid aggression, in fact, since then, by invading it, Putin now threatens a large-scale invasion to destroy the country, not only because it is successfully undergoing comprehensive domestic transformation, but more importantly, because it has a potential to trigger similar democratic reforms in Russia. If the West is serious about defending democracy, Ukraine is the right place to prove its words with deeds, which it is doing now. Right now, Ukraine's democracy is facing an existential threat from Russia. The biggest support the West could give to sustain domestic reform achievements would be helping the country hold its ground against external aggression. Okay, exactly that. Modern Ukraine is a battlefield of the future against the past. Democracy against autocracy. Losing Ukraine will mean losing the global war for democracy. Boom! That just gave me a shiver down my back. That is spot on. And a very prescient conclusion to that article. So to go back to just trolls on Threads, this is just nonsense. You're talking nonsense. Go away. And if you're going to make claims that are against the sort of things I say, please try and substantiate them. Right? Don't just come on a thread and say blah blah blah. And yeah, I will often write things like citation required, a bit like Wikipedia. Yeah, you made a claim. Where's your substantiation? Where's your citation to support what you're saying? Don't just come on and make these claims. And that goes for anyone making arguments. We all need to justify our arguments, and hopefully I do try to do that and give a range of sources and give a bit of explanation to things I say. That's the whole point of this Ukraine War Update Extra section, right? Is to just kind of flesh out some of these ideas that I may hint at in the map ones. But Russia is massively corrupt. Ukraine is corrupt, but has been putting things in place with assistance to fight that. And those things were making some real tangible difference. And you can guarantee that after this war finishes, and with the West having helped Ukraine so much, the expectations would be that corruption needs to be sorted out. So you can guarantee that with Ukraine prevailing in this war, they would be working in the right direction to sort out those previously existing problems. Anyway, thanks for all your support. I hope this was of interest to you. Let me know if you disagree, as ever, but please do so with respect. And if you can like, subscribe, share these videos and whatever, that's great. You can join my channel members, and thank you to all the members who have done that. Really, really appreciate that. It's buy me a coffee, PayPal, or anything like that, just to help me to do what I do. I spend quite a lot of time in my day doing this, and even when I'm not doing these videos, I'm constantly looking through information and sources to just give me ideas for the stuff I will be talking about and the information I do impart. But yeah, anyway, thanks for all your help. You take care, stay safe, and until next time, goodbye.